Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan, coming to you from the National Weather Service on behalf of a special partnership with Alaska Public Media. It is Saturday, October 8th, 2022, and we're going to jump right into it. Quite a few things to cover this evening. A high wind warning is in effect until 1 a.m. this Saturday, or I should say Sunday morning, for Turnagain Arm and the Anchorage hillside area. Higher hills there outside of Anchorage. Winds could gust as high as 60 to 70 miles per hour. A wind advisory is in effect for the east central Alaska range, including places like Black Rapids and Isabel Pass, where winds there could gust as high as 60 miles an hour through the pre-dawn hours of Sunday morning. And then with the colder air and moisture push coming up through the interior, there could be as much as 2 to 6 inches of snow east central interior, especially around and above 2,000 feet here this Saturday evening through Sunday night. Places like Arctic Village could pick up 4 or 5 inches of snow with this particular system. And then there is a coastal flood watch in effect for Bristol Bay coast area on Monday, and I'll talk more about that momentarily. Looking up along the northwest coast, Kotzebue, patchy low clouds and some fog, 32 degrees, but conditions much improved from the big Chukchi storm that was experienced late Wednesday into Thursday and Friday. Winds have certainly come down considerably. In the southwest coast, where that coastal flood watch is in effect for Monday, Togiak is mostly cloudy, some breaks in the cloud with the temperature there this afternoon at 43 degrees. And then Isabel Pass does have a few breaks in the clouds, a breezy 50 degrees. Stronger winds have been reported this afternoon up toward Black Rapids, gusting at times around 40 miles an hour. And then a very raw Saturday afternoon at Portage Glacier. We have windy conditions with rain and fog. Winds have been gusting at times of around 30 to 40 miles an hour. Temperature there at 52 degrees. So the current hazards maps, we do have the wind advisory in effect for the east central Alaska range until 6 a.m. Sunday morning for wind gusts up to 60 miles an hour. The area that's in the kind of the grayish light blue are special weather statements. The area covering much of the east central northeast interior has to do with the potential for 2 to as much as 6 inches of snow, especially around and above 2,000 feet. The area along the northwest Arctic coast, from Point Hope through Utqiagvik and then east through Kaktovik, is for the potential for some elevated surf here as we go into Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Some brisker winds are going to set up there along the Arctic coast toward the middle part of this week. And then in the southwest, we have the coastal flood watch for the areas along Bristol Bay for Monday into Monday evening, where water levels could be running 2 to as much as 5 feet above the normal high tide line, so keep that in mind. But here's a recap of some of the peak wind gusts that occurred with the recent Chukchi storm here late Wednesday through Thursday and Friday. Cape Lisburne comes in with top honors at a 90 mile per hour gust. Tin City 78 miles an hour. Red Dog Dock 76 miles an hour, and Savunga there on the north side of St. Lawrence Island 75 miles an hour, and all those technically qualify as hurricane force peak wind gust. Point Hope had a peak wind of 70 miles an hour, and there were reports of some minor coastal flooding around Kotzebue as well as up toward Utqiagvik. Very strong southwesterly winds. Much of that northwest shore had shore parallel waves and current, so that's probably why it favored Kotzebue Sound, and then just on the other side of Utqiagvik. Looking at the cloud enhancement, we have a curl in the clouds there in the central northern portion of the Gulf, and another area of enhanced clouds from the northern areas of the Alaska Peninsula all the way up into the interior. There's going to be an area of precipitation mainly in the form of some snow along and north of the Alaska Range through the central Yukon Valley into the east central interior as we go through tonight. So Definitely snow levels lowering to around 2,000 feet and accumulating snows as much as 2 to 6 inches likely there across areas of the east central interior from this Saturday evening through Sunday night. And looking at the weather map, there's that one low located there, kind of moving out toward Shelikof Strait there, just west of Kodiak Island. It's going to ride northeastward. Weaker low just off of south there of Yakutat. And then the interior, we see the precipitation, and with nightfall, we expect that to be changing over to snow across the east central interior. Another low way out there on the left, lower left corner of your screen, that's going to be the low that ends up tracking just north of the Aleutian chain across the lower Bering and heading up toward Bristol Bay by Monday. But the low that we're watching over the Alaska Peninsula by late tonight, early Sunday morning, will be located there near the entrance of Cook Inlet and just the east side of the Kenai, with some heavier rain along the northern Gulf Coast. And then the snows on the backside of the system from the Alaska Range north and westward on up into the Yukon Valley and the eastern Brooks Range. Those snows will continue in those areas during the day on Sunday as that low gradually begins to weaken and moves inland. The next low that'll bring some potentially higher water levels along Bristol Bay by Monday, it will be located Sunday afternoon just north of the central Aleutians, and then by Monday it'll be moving across Bristol Bay and into the northern portion of the Alaska Peninsula. Low temperatures for Sunday morning, very mild in the 50s across the Panhandle, 40s back across south central areas, so quite mild for this time of year. You can see some high temperatures, lower 60s there, the outer west southwest coast there of the Panhandle. Still 40s to near 50 at best across south central areas, and then look for lows back in the 40s in the Panhandle, but then turning colder, some 20s setting up there through the Copper River Basin and especially north of Anchorage Monday morning. Daytime highs still managing some 50s there in the Panhandle, but cool there across areas of the south central interior. And across the far north, we expect readings below freezing along and north of the Yukon River. Sunday afternoon, temperatures may still get a smidgen above freezing there south of the Brooks Range, 30s to near 40. Warmest reading is along the Alcan border with some 40s still in that area. And then Monday morning lows will be getting down 10, 15 above there along the Brooks Range, 20s along the Arctic coast into the Seward Peninsula. Most areas should be getting below freezing, with Monday afternoon highs much cooler, generally just mid to upper 30s at best south of the Yukon River, and then near or below freezing north of the Yukon River. And across the interior Sunday morning, some lows could be down around or just below freezing. Generally above 40 along the Alaska Peninsula in through the Aleutians. Sunday afternoon, look for highs upper 30s to near 40 southwest interior, 40s to near 50 as we go through the eastern Aleutians. Monday morning lows below freezing there across the interior areas of the lower Yukon Valley, but in the lower mid 40s along the Alaska Peninsula, with some lower 50s there as we go into Monday afternoon. And temperatures October 14th through the 18th through mid-month should average above normal in the southeast, especially the Panhandle. Cooler than normal temperatures in the northwest. Precipitation could average above to much above normal, especially the east and southeast interior along the Alcan border into the Panhandle.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Well, it's now time for your aviation weather, and you have a flight planned either on Sunday or Monday. Main weather feature will be an area of low pressure that's located over Cook Inlet, working its way slowly eastward and weakening across the northern Gulf as we go into Monday. Further west, another low will be traversing the western half of the Aleutians and then riding along and north of the Aleutians through the lower Bering Sea and approaching, getting into Bristol Bay by Monday afternoon. Extending north of the low that's there around Cook Inlet, we are seeing an area of IFR conditions up through the central interior, right up along the Brooks Range, areas of snow. We also have a broad area of IFR conditions across the Panhandle Sunday morning out into the eastern two-thirds of the Gulf and north and northeastern Gulf Coast, and then an area of IFR back out there toward the central western Aleutians. Sunday afternoon, look for IFR conditions to prevail there along the Arctic coast, the eastern two-thirds of the North Slope, in through the Yukon Flats and then down and along, especially along and just north and west of the Alaska Range. Also areas of IFR, southern two-thirds there of the Panhandle, and areas along the north central Gulf Coast into the intercoastal mountains and then back out across much of the eastern central Aleutians. Monday morning, that low working its way north of the Aleutian chain through the lower Bering, approaching the southwest areas with widespread IFR conditions along the southwest coast, including Bristol Bay, extending on up into around Kodiak Island, and we still have pockets of IFR along areas of the north slope toward Anatuvik Pass, Dead Horse, and up there along the Arctic coast. Monday afternoon, look for rather widespread IFR conditions over the open waters of the Gulf along areas of Prince William Sound, eastern Kenai, entrance to Cook Inlet, Lake Iliamna, back toward Bristol Bay, and also over the southern two-thirds of the Panhandle. Anatuvik Pass will see IFR conditions try and become MVFR during the daylight hours Sunday. Adigan Pass should generally hold on to IFR conditions as there will be an area of snow there and eastward. And then further south and west along the Alaska Range west arm, there in the higher elevations, so there will be some snow. Lake Clark and Merrill, IFR conditions. Rainy Pass, same thing, should generally hold on to IFR. And Windy Pass may become MVFR by afternoon, especially the southern half of the pass, but as you fly north of there, north of the north entrance, IFR conditions. Isabel Pass, generally expecting MVFR conditions Sunday, and Mentasta may start out VFR early Sunday morning, giving way to MVFR conditions. Tanita Pass will see widespread IFR conditions around there in the morning, giving way to MVFR conditions. Same thing at Portage Pass, expect IFR conditions there in the morning, giving way to MVFR conditions. And then for the far northern Panhandle, Chilkoot and White Passes, MVFR conditions becoming VFR Sunday afternoon. And freezing levels are lowest across the west side of the state. We have this freezing level aloft down to or below 2,000 feet to much of the western and northern portions of the mainland, extending down into the Alaska Peninsula. Still freezing levels around and above 10,000 feet there through the central and southern Panhandle. Greatest threat for icing will be along the Gulf Coast, areas of the Panhandle, extending along, especially west and north of the Alaska Range, up into the central interior and into the southeast side there of the Brooks Range, anywhere from 5,000 to above 8,000 feet there in the interior, and generally above 12,000 feet there over the Gulf Coast. Back toward the west, above 5,000 and 7,000 feet there, central western Aleutians. Jet stream winds at 30,000 feet, 155 knot. Jet core coming on in toward Bristol Bay and out over the lower half of the Bering, back toward the central Aleutians. At 700 millibars, 9,000 feet, we see broad southwesterly flow coming into British Columbia and across the Panhandle, and then a broad area of winds across the central eastern Aleutians from the west upwards to 80 knots, and then bringing it down to 3,000 feet. We see the low pressure circulation there in the northern Gulf with offshore winds of 60 knots there near the entrance of Cook Inlet, and then around and south of the central Aleutians, winds of 60 to 70 knots from the west. And this will translate to an area of potentially isolated severe turbulence there in through the central, poking into the eastern Aleutians from surface to 3,000 feet. As we go up the Alaska Peninsula, we expect considerable moderate turbulence, surface to 4,000 feet, and then along the Gulf Coast, including areas of the Panhandle and Prince William Sound, surface to 6,000 feet, and then upwards toward the Alaska Range, surface to 12,000 foot, moderate turbulence is anticipated.
Floating hundreds of miles from Earth, astronauts get a unique perspective of our planet. While they might recognize landmarks, space is the only place they can see the very edge of our planet's atmosphere.
From orbit, particularly looking at the horizon, did bring to mind how thin the atmosphere is. It's like an onion skin around this great big ball of the Earth.
This uppermost layer of Earth's atmosphere, the ionosphere, also overlaps with the very beginning of space. It's the job of NASA's new mission, GOLD, the Global Scale Observations of the Limmendisk Instrument, to study this region, a region that isn't just for astronauts to explore, but that affects humans every day down on the ground. For one thing, this layer of the upper atmosphere helps protect us from harmful radiation and energy emanating from the sun. But in our modern society, it does so much more. It affects the smartphone that sits in your pocket and the radio waves that guide our airplanes. The ionosphere is a crucial layer of the atmosphere through which our communications and GPS signals travel. And when this region changes, it impacts those communication signals. Changes can occur above this region from the sun's activity, also known as space weather. Changes can also occur below from Earth's weather, such as hurricanes and wind patterns. Gold connects the dots between how space weather and Earth's weather shape the upper reaches of the atmosphere. But this region isn't easy to study. The ionosphere spans roughly 60 to 400 miles from Earth's surface, which is too high for aircraft and scientific balloons, and the lower regions are too low to easily study with satellites. What are attainable, however, are the swaths of red and green light shining out from the upper atmosphere. Formed when the sun's rays hit atmospheric molecules, this light, named airglow, comes from green and red bands of glowing gas. Some of the airglow is invisible to our eyes, shining in infrared and ultraviolet light, which can only be seen with scientific instrumentation. Taking advantage of our planet's natural glow is gold. The gold instrument, which is about the size of a mini-fridge, is hitching a ride on a commercial communication satellite, SES-14. The satellite's orbit lies 22,000 miles above Earth, where it can record images in ultraviolet light to monitor changes in airglow across the globe. These images give information on the temperature, density, and composition of particles in the upper atmosphere. Gold collects these observations faster than any mission has ever done before. It captures an image of Earth's entire disk every 30 minutes, allowing scientists to see how the upper atmosphere evolves throughout the day. Gold joins a host of missions studying the very nature of space, around Earth, the Sun, and planets. As NASA ventures farther and farther from home, knowing the nature of space itself is crucial for our journey to understand our solar system and beyond.
There's a new class of chemical compounds impacting the Earth's ozone layer and raising concerns among some scientists. But a new NASA analysis indicates stratospheric ozone could actually be impacted more by climate change and the continued release of already banned chemicals. The Earth's ozone hole is showing signs of recovery, decades after the landmark agreement called the Montreal Protocol that banned many chemical compounds harmful to the ozone layer.
So we know the Montreal Protocol was a huge success. This was signed in the late 1980s when scientists and policymakers from around the world gathered together to try to save the ozone layer.
The chemicals they regulated persist in the atmosphere for many decades. They thin the ozone layer and they create a seasonal hole over Antarctica. They basically take away part of our planet's natural sunscreen, and that increases the risk of skin cancer and damage to plants.
Scientists have projected the ozone hole could disappear almost completely by about 2075, but several factors could delay that recovery.
There are some industrial compounds that are not banned by the Montreal Protocol, but as they enter the atmosphere, they will also hurt the ozone layer.
But the unregulated compounds have a short lifespan in the atmosphere, unlike the chlorofluorocarbons that were originally regulated. So they have a short-lived impact on ozone, and we don't think they'll delay recovery by more than a few years.
We projected by 2050, more than half of the ozone-depleting compounds in the atmosphere will come from long-lived substances banned by the protocol.
Because these compounds stay in the air for such a long time, compared to the unregulated, short-lived compounds, they will have a disproportionate and lingering impact on ozone. So any non-compliance with the protocol can have significant consequences.
And the really big uncertainty in ozone layer recovery is climate change. There are many naturally produced ozone-depleting substances that are emitted by the oceans. And as the oceans continue to warm due to climate change, those emissions will increase, and that will further delay ozone recovery.
Scientists want to better understand how climate change will affect ozone recovery.
This is a hard problem. As a scientific community, we need to work on this major issue. We now have a powerful new tool to simulate atmosphere and its interaction with land and ocean to study this issue. And that's what we're going to do.
How can you see the atmosphere? The answer is blowing in the wind. Tiny particles known as aerosols are carried by the air around the globe. This visualization uses data from NASA satellites combined with our knowledge of physics and meteorology to track 3 aerosols: dust, smoke, and sea salt. Sea salt, shown here in blue, is picked up by winds passing over the ocean. As tropical storms and hurricanes form, the salt particles are concentrated into the spiraling shape we all recognize. With their movements, we can follow the formation of Hurricane Irma and see the dust from the Sahara, shown in tan, get washed out of the storm center by the rain. Advances in computing speed allow scientists to include more details of these physical processes in their simulations of how the aerosols interact with the storm systems. The increased resolution of the computer simulation is apparent in fine details like the hurricane bands spiraling counterclockwise. Computer simulations let us see how different processes fit together and evolve as a system. By using mathematical models to represent nature, we can separate the system into component parts and better understand the underlying physics of each. Today's research improves next year's weather forecasting ability. Hurricane Ophelia was very unusual. It headed northeast, pulling in Saharan dust and smoke from wildfires in Portugal, carrying both to Ireland and the UK. This aerosol interaction was very different from other storms of the season. As computing speed continues to increase, scientists will be able to bring more scientific details into the simulations, giving us a deeper understanding of our home planet.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Before we jump into the marine weather, I want a quick update. The coastal flood watch that was in effect for the area around Bristol Bay has been upgraded to a high surf advisory for the day on Monday. We expect the water levels there along Bristol Bay to be as much as 2 to 4 feet above normal high tide. And in addition, a high wind watch has been issued for late Sunday night into Monday for the eastern Aleutians and the Alaska Peninsula, including Cold Bay, where winds could be as strong as 40 to 50 miles an hour sustained, with gusts up to 75 miles an hour possible. Now, ice development, there's a little bit of early season ice there along the Arctic coast between Utqiagvik and Kaktovik. Did not get as disturbed as much as the areas along the northwest coast down in the Kotzebue Sound, where that recent storm really churned things up, helped break up and melt off that ice. That ice there will slowly redevelop here in the coming week or so. And looking at the marine forecast for the southeast panhandle, south winds 20 to 25 knots, fairly common, waves 4 to 5 feet, Ketchikan to Petersburg, but 35 knot south gales with 7-foot waves there in Lynn Canal. The outer coast strongest winds will be northwest of Sitka, 30 to 35 knot south to southwest gales, and waves 15 to 18 feet there. On Monday, inner channels winds will generally be 15 to 20 knots, waves 3 to 4 feet. The outer coast, look for westerly winds around 25 knots and waves 15 to 17 feet. For Sunday, strong winds, 50 to 55 knot storm force west winds there at the entrance of Cook Inlet, 45 knot gales off the Kenai Peninsula, with waves in those areas running 15 to 19 feet. Southeast winds to 20 knots, 4-foot waves, Prince William Sound, and northwest winds to 20 knots there, Turnagain Arm, north end of the Cook Inlet, with waves running 4 or 5 feet. On Monday, winds will still be brisk southwesterly, 35 knot gales at the entrance there to Cook Inlet and off the Kenai, with waves anywhere from 10 to 16 feet. South winds to 25 knots, waves 4 feet in Prince William Sound, and 3-footers there up on the north end of Cook Inlet. On Sunday, winds will be upwards of 40 to 45 knots just south and southeast of Kodiak Island, with waves of 14 to 20 feet in the open waters of the western Gulf. Look for 35 knot northwest winds there in Bristol Bay, with waves upwards of 10 to 11 feet. And on Monday, stronger storm system moving through. That's what's going to cause those higher water levels along Bristol Bay, along with some storm force winds. We could expect winds as high as 45 to 50 knots there in through Bristol Bay out of the west. Waves running as high as 15 to just over 20 feet on the North Pacific side, and 13 to as much as 22 feet there north of Cold Bay. Across the Aleutian chain, winds will be out of the south-southwest, 35 to 45 knot gales. North Pacific side, 15 to 19 feet. And on the on the Bering side, we expect waves of 8 to 12 feet. Strongest wind shift east on Monday. There, Dutch Harbor could see westerly winds to 55 knots with waves as much as around 20 feet there. Falling off to westerly winds to 30 knots there through the western half of the Aleutians, and waves running 9 to 13 feet. Along the southwest coast, generally west winds to 20 knots there into Norton Sound, waves 4 feet. Kind of a variable wind to 25 knots, 6-foot waves there at St. Paul and St. George. And on Monday, backside of that low, northwest winds, 40-knot gales off of the southwest coast, 50 knots east of St. Paul and St. George, with waves 12 to 15 feet. Further north, northwest winds to 40 knots there on the north side of Nunavik Island, with waves of 8 feet and 4-footers with northeast winds out of Norton Sound. Along the Arctic coast, a mixed bag north winds to 20 knots, waves generally 4 feet. Westerly winds through the lower Chukchi Sea, 15 to 20 knots with waves of 4 to 6 feet. And then along the Arctic coast, winds will generally be out of the southwest at 20 to 25 knots with waves of 5 to 6 feet. And then along the Chukchi Sea coast, the northwest coast down through the Bering Strait, winds will generally be out of the west to northwest at 15 to 20 knots, waves running 4 to 7 feet. And a quick check. Sunday, we have that low that'll be approaching the eastern Aleutians, riding up through the lower Bering. And as that system moves across Bristol Bay, we expect those storm force winds and higher water levels there that could run as much as 2 to 4 feet above normal high tide, with a low crossing there toward the entrance of Cook Inlet by Monday afternoon.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.